there was a drug dealer that I had engaged with that was I owed some money to, and he was like shaking me down in bed. And then he says to me, as I'm terrified, he says, "Don't worry, Lance, I'm not going to hurt you. God told me, not this one. He has a plan for you."
Welcome to Jesus in the Upper Left, where we're talking about gospel multiplication in the Pacific Northwest.
Well, welcome to this episode of Jesus in the Upper Left. My name is Gabe Kolstad. I'm a pastor at Westside Community Church in the Portland, Oregon area, and I'm here with my friends Elise and Lance. We're going to have a really interesting conversation today about engaging with local leaders and people that maybe sometimes it's a little bit uncomfortable to know how to talk to. Elise and I were recently in a meeting, and a certain name kept coming up. And so we wanted to bring Lance on here. Elise, you want to tell us a little bit more about that situation and why we're here?
Yeah, I'd love to. So Gabe and I both serve on the Together PDX leadership team, which is essentially just a group of local leaders who are trying to connect and strengthen our churches, really for the flourishing of our city. And what came up in this meeting, somebody just mentioned Lance Orton. And then once it was mentioned for the first time, it was like people just kept popping, "Oh yeah, Lance is great at this, Lance is great at that." It was you wish that Lance was in the room so he could have heard all of the nice things people kept saying about him. But the takeaway from his name being caught up is not just, yes, he's an amazing leader of city team. We'll get to that and his amazing work there. But the real takeaway is Lance is so good at making friends. He's really good at making friends from different backgrounds and different just walks of life. But specifically, the thing that kept coming up in this meeting was he's good at making friends with city leaders. Mm-hmm. And that was a takeaway as something with the Together PDX leadership team that we kind of said, man, in the history of this kind of like united churches working together for the flourishing of our city, which has, been happening for many, many years now, we used to do that more intentionally. It's something that we've kind of lost recently, not lost completely, but it's something that we want to lean into and be more intentional about. And we said, we need to learn how to do that. And Lance is actually the person that we want to learn from. He's so good at being completely centered on Jesus and completely breaking down walls that would divide him from the people that he's talking with. And so after that meeting, Gabe and I sent a few voice notes back and forth, and we were like, what would it be like to not just have us learn from Lance, but to actually kind of share that conversation so that pastors or church leaders or church planters could learn from that as well. And so we were like, we've got to get him on the podcast. Let's do it.
Yeah. Thanks, Elise. And Lance, welcome. Thanks so much for being here with us.
Yeah, it's great to be here. An honor, truly. I'm a big fan of Elise. I mean, you said all those wonderful and kind things to me, but I've always seen you as a great connector. I mean, my first experience with you and Together PDX and Nicole Larson, of course, was just like, oh man, this is so cool. Like an effort, an initiative to connect nonprofits, especially during COVID when there was so much connection between us all. And we were all running around trying to figure out what to do with our time. And, you guys really brought a whole bunch of us together. And those regular rhythms of meetings were how I started to really build my network and connect with other leaders in the homeless and addiction space. So yeah, it's an honor. I'm really glad to be here.
Very cool. Well, why don't you start off with just an introduction of yourself, your family, your ministry, and kind of like how you ended up here?
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me, quick background is I grew up in California kid, born in Southern California, very normal. My mom was a Montessori teacher. My dad was a Lego salesman and have a little brother. And we grew up, surfing and boogie boarding and playing with Legos. And it was a very normal middle class upbringing around.
Let me just interrupt you and say, normal. Your dad was a Lego salesman, and you and his two boys at home.
Coolest
That's awesome.
job ever. We had more Legos than any kid on the block. I mean, the trundle bed drawers under your bed. We had 3 of them full of Legos, and so that made us popular on the block. Well. Shortly after, around 7 years old, my dad's career took off, and he got a high-level kind of VP sales job for American Express, and that moved us all to Dallas, Texas. And when you grow up at the beach in Southern California, going to Dallas, Texas was like the worst thing that could have ever happened to a kid. And I was old enough to realize this was not fun. And then on top of that, my family, their parents went through a divorce. And so right in my formative adolescent age, 12, 13, my parents divorced. My dad's career really took off. This was right around the .com era. So, we're 90s, early 90s. My dad went to San Francisco. I stayed with my mom, and we kind of bounced back and forth from SoCal back to Texas. And it was just kind of, typical divorce, very messy. I should note there was no faith upbringing in our family. We were very secular. My mom was very spiritual and played around with Eastern philosophies and went to India and studied Buddhism and Taoism. And my dad was very much agnostic. And so just kind of important to note that there was no church influence in my life at all until 42 years old, which is when I turned my life over to Christ. And so in that season of real uncertainty and watching my family kind of fall apart, I was at that early teenage years, 13 going on 17. And I just decided that divorce was a adult problem, and I didn't want anything to do with it. I'm just going to be a teenager and go out and have fun with my friends. And so parenting sort of took a side seat as my family was trying to navigate. My dad was building his career. My mom was trying to recover from the heartbreak of losing the family. And so I wanted to move to San Francisco. My mom was in Texas, and I didn't want to be there. And so I knew that if I behaved in a manner that was challenging to my mother, that she would eventually kick me out and send me to my dad's. And so, unfortunately for my mother, I did just that. Wound up in San Francisco in 1991 as a junior in high school. And so I had moved 3 high schools. I think you said earlier that Lance is really good at meeting friends. Well, one of the benefits to that chaos was I really got good at adapting to new environments. And with an extroverted personality, I was able to meet people really easily. And so I got to San Francisco my junior year and got put into Catholic private school, which was shockingly really amazing. I loved private Catholic school. It was a really incredible school, and I met tons of great friends who I still have to this day. But there was the faith element didn't stick. There was mass that we attended once a week, and I was mesmerized by the ceremony of it all and the tradition, and I loved it. But the teachings never resonated with me, and I was a teenager in high school, so I was focused on other things. So anyway, through that, Dad became sort of my role model, and he had some really big success in the .com world early, founded a company that later became Travelocity.com. And so a lot of wealth in that phase of my life, which, led to some probably negative side effects down the road. But I was very comfortable growing up and followed in my dad's footsteps, went to college, got a business degree. And then tragically in 2005, my father, my hero, my role model, was killed in a tragic accident, real fluke thing. Tractor flipped on top of him. He had retired from the Silicon Valley deal, bought a ranch in Napa Valley, which is, very typical of the Silicon Valley world, and then flipped a tractor on him and killed him. And so without having the spiritual framework to process a loss like that, I turned to drugs and alcohol, and for about 10 years tried to numb the pain of that loss with alcohol and drugs. So that's the kind of backstory. I'll stop and let you probe me, because I could go on for 45 minutes on my story.
Yeah, wow. I mean, that's a lot. I mean, knowing what you do now, it's amazing that God has used. I always love that thing about your misery becomes your ministry. That God's able to redeem like those areas of your life and the pain and the mistakes and all that stuff. So thank you. I guess I would say thank you for being so vulnerable and transparent with us to just share what's led, what was the kind of formative and foundational parts of your life. And We haven't gotten you to Portland yet.
Right. Yes. So Portland was not ever in the plan. That 10 years of just sort of bouncing around, it was a series of just sort of lower bottoms. I kept, I had enough college education and enough to sort of sustain myself for a while, and then I would crash and burn, and those bottoms got lower and lower, which eventually led to homelessness. I was addicted started with opioids, painkillers. That led to a heroin addiction. And by 2018, I was living in my car in Bend, Oregon, and running from my problems. I have to tell this story quickly because it's pretty crazy. There was a drug dealer that I had engaged with that was I owed some money to, and he was like shaking me down in Bend, and I'm living in the back of my car, and from one fix to the next, because opioids are just the withdrawal is so terrible that it just takes over your entire purpose. And so I wanted to get away from this drug dealer, and we'll just call him Crazy Cameron for the purposes of the story. And so I thought I would pack up my Jeep, move to Portland, and get sober. And I had to get off this stuff. I had $50 to my name, half a tank of gas, and I had everything in my Jeep because I'd been living there. And I wound up in a Walmart parking lot in Troutdale, ran out of gas. That was the end of the line. I'm sitting in the back of my Jeep for 5 days, self-detoxing myself. And I remember it was the worst 5 days of my life. And I was laying in the back at one point praying to a God that I did not even know. The universe was kind of my framework for spirituality. And I was just like, look, I don't know how to be a 42-year-old individual. So either just take me or give me some kind of purpose and reason to exist. And crazy as it is, the universe, God answered that prayer in the form of Crazy Cameron finding me. He showed up at my Jeep through a conversation. It's a much longer story, but I basically couldn't hack it after 5 days. I got on my phone, found a girl in Bend that I had used with, convinced her to bring me out some more drugs. And through that conversation, somehow he found out where I was, showed up at my car with a gun, told me he was going to take my Jeep and everything I owned because I owed him some money, and told me to drive. And as I'm driving, he was a meth addict, high on meth, really scary individual that you don't want to owe money to. And he started rambling stories of Jesus in the desert for 40 days. And this story meant nothing to me. I had never even really heard it. So I just thought this was the ramblings of a meth addict. And then he says to me, as I'm terrified, he says, "Don't worry, Lance, I'm not going to hurt you. God told me, not this one. He has a plan for you. You need to go to rehab and get your life together." In the moment, that did not resonate as anything other than a psychotic meth addict, and I needed to get away from this individual as fast as possible. Long story short, he didn't hurt me, left me on the side of the road, drove off with my Jeep, and that led me to the front doors of City Team's homeless shelter in Portland. And so that's how I got here. I was a resident of City Team, 3 days in the shelter, found out they had this recovery discipleship, another word I didn't know anything about. All I heard was that you could stay at the City Team program for a year for free, and they would teach me about this Jesus character, help me with my addiction. And all I heard was live here for free for a year. And I signed up, and that's how I got here.
Wow. Lance, I had never heard that part of your story, and I don't think I've ever heard a story of a drug dealer prophesying over somebody's life and then it coming true. That's just like, that's actually crazy.
Yeah. And it's a little crazier. I'll go 2 more minutes on this, and then we can get into politics and civic leaders and all that good stuff. So 90 days into the program, my head's cleared up. I'm sober. I'm learning about Jesus. I'm learning about God. I went into it with a real open mind. So I was just willing to accept that I didn't know anything about how to live. And so I let people pour into me. But at about 90 days, I started thinking about Crazy Cameron and my Jeep. And I started like kind of replaying some of the things he was saying. And I questioned, did that actually happen? And I thought, man, that guy stole my Jeep. He owes me a Jeep, that jerk. I've got to let him know that when I get out of here, I'm coming after him. So I devised this plan to find him on Facebook because I knew through Facebook I could connect with him. And so I jumped online at 90 days with a plan to let him know that I was coming after him as soon as I got out of this program. And right as I started typing, I see that he's online. There's like green light on Messenger. He's there. I'm like, man, I got him. And instead, as soon as I started typing, it hit me like a ton of bricks what he said. Don't worry, Lance, I'm not going to hurt you. God told me not to hurt you because he has a plan for you. You're special. You got a plan. He's got a plan for you. And it was this aha moment where all of a sudden I realized without a doubt that God was real. He did use this person to let me know that he loved me. He had a plan for me. He had been pursuing me probably my whole life. I just didn't know it. And so instead of my crazy plan, I thanked Crazy Cameron. I said, man, thank you for what you did. I'm in a Christian rehab. My life it's going great. You can have my Jeep, have a nice life. And he wrote back, said, thank you. You're doing great. Good job. Or he said, I'm proud of you. And that was it.
Wow. Good night.
Well,
so kind of like you said, sort of normal story.
Normal
like
conversion story, right? Like that's how we all find out God is real.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I'm picking up already the kind of like lesson number 1. If you want to make friends with people, be radically transparent. This is what I'm picking up here. Lance, that's so cool. And thank you again for your just willingness to share with us, because I know that all goes into why we're having this conversation today. And cool that as we were even just talking earlier before this recording, that we realized we had a very good friend in common who's now passed away, but that was a part of both of our stories. So very cool.
Yeah.
Let's jump to now. You're in Portland. I mean, I know there's a lot more to unpack about. Okay, you're in Portland, but now you're leading City Team. So maybe walk us through that transition, and then talk a little bit about your role in the city that you play now and what you like about it.
Yeah. So while I was in the program, which is a year-long residential discipleship program, I became really fascinated with the homeless continuum of care in Portland. And I really wanted to understand, it seems so prolific in the area. And I also, having a business background and a business degree, I was the resident that was really asking annoying questions to the staff all the time, like, what's your annual budget? And how do you fund this thing? And how is it possible that this is free and I'm not paying anything? And so through that year, I kind of just dove in on really looking at what are the other organizations doing. And then I graduated and did some development work for a small nonprofit called Because People Matter that had this incredible outreach thing under the Burnside Bridge every Thursday night called Night Strike. And I started leading that. And that introduced me through development work, introduced me to tons of other organizations. And I started to see the difference between the privately funded faith organizations and then the more publicly funded sheltering and medical treatment facilities. And then we got into, I'm trying to understand harm reduction. And you saw all these people as the opioid epidemic morphed from heroin to fentanyl. You started seeing a ton of this medical assisted treatment thing, which I was like, wow, I didn't use any of that. And I had a really, really heavy heroin habit. And so I kind of started learning about that. And then when I became the director of City Team in 2022, now I'm responsible for an organization that is privately funded. We are going through this expanse phase, and God's just like blessing us in so many different ways with new buildings and a women's program, and trying to meet the growing need in Portland. And through that, of course, funding is always at the core of what we're able to do. I started exploring funding pathways. One that we had never explored at City Team was public funding. And I had heard from many other peers in the space that, you're faith-based, you're never going to get public money. And if you did, then they're going to tell you you can't do this and you can't do that. And you don't want to get into that. But at that time, the headlines were the Joint Office of Homeless Services, which is housed, now it's the homeless department services, something like that, homeless services department, HSD, under Multnomah County was the biggest funding of homelessness and addiction services. And the headlines were, Multnomah County is sitting on hundreds of millions of dollars of the SHS, Supportive Housing Services tax dollars. They couldn't get it out the door fast enough. And simultaneously, we're in the process of buying this new building and converting it from an empty office building into a new residential recovery facility. And I'm thinking, man, we need to raise $8.5 million. Seems like this would just be a really good fit as a piece of our funding model. So I'm going to go after it. And that's how I got engaged with the public model. And someone told me, if you want public money, you got to start meeting public officials. And so I went on a quest to start meeting with county commissioners. And it was kind of funny, though, simultaneously, like I had intention, but also God started opening the doors for these meetings in ways that were noticeably it was a coincidence that seemed really odd to me. Like, for example, former Commissioner Sharon Myron showed up at City Team and was like, hey, I want to learn about everything that you guys are doing. And she came with a gentleman who's now a city councilor, Eric Zimmerman. And I thought, wow, this is interesting. And so we started talking, and, these government officials just kept coming into my life. And I'm just thinking, okay, I think this is a sign we're supposed to get public money. Turns out we have not gotten any public money to this date. So then I started asking the question, okay, God, what's going on here? Why are you bringing all these people into my life? And then I'll fast forward to last year, the mayoral elections. Keith Wilson is running for mayor alongside a handful of other candidates, Renee Gonzalez and Carmen Rubio. And so someone was like, hey, you should try to meet these. Someone told me, stop wasting your time with current elected officials and start meeting the officials that are running for election, because that's the ones you want to build relationships with, so that when they become in office, they're familiar with your work and what you're doing. They're always going to be running on a campaign of reform and change. And so that's the best way to do that. And so I met with Renee Gonzalez, I met with Carmen Rubio, and then Keith Wilson shows up, and he was sort of the dark horse. No one expected that he could win. I mean, the polls were like he had no chance at all. And he showed up at the front doors of City Team and said, hey, I would love to learn about all things City Team. Show me your model. I hear you have an incredible success rate long-term. Let's talk. And so we just built a relationship on his enthusiasm and kind of out of the box thinking. He's a CEO business guy, and I really related to that mentality. And so we just kind of became friends. And all of a sudden, there was an Oregonian article that says Keith Wilson is poised to win this thing. And I just thought, man, is he actually going to win? And sure enough, he did. And so that has sort of opened the door for me to work side by side with him and his team at Portland Solutions to look at what can the city do to dig us out of this homelessness and addiction crisis, which is unique because it's typically not the city's role. I don't know if most people don't know this, but the role of county of health, addiction, and homelessness falls under the county's purview. That is typically a county function. The city is safety, livability, infrastructure. And so to have a mayor that ran on a campaign to end unsheltered homelessness was very unique because it's, again, not typically the city's role. And so it's an interesting time. And Mayor Wilson is laser focused on this issue. And we at City Team and all the other organizations like ours are laser focused on the same thing. And so it's fun to have a seat at the table and talk about what's working and what's not working.
Lance, one of the things that sticks out to me is that, well, first of all, it sounds like it's almost your, and I of course mean this in a good way, but your lack of experience in kind of the like running a nonprofit or doing this kind of thing that actually has opened the doors and led to this. I love that because it sounds like, traditional wisdom in your field was, well, there's no point. You're not going to get the funding, so don't bother. And it's kind of funny to me that you you mentioned, I mean, you still haven't gotten the funding.
Right.
So it's almost a redefinition, though, of like the success or the why, because some people, some of those maybe more jaded folks who would say, don't even bother, you're not going to get the money. They might still be looking at you and saying, haha, see, you've wasted all this time and you haven't gotten the money. And so I'm just, maybe we'll get to this in the other questions, but I'm just curious, like, why is it still, like, why is this still success to you?
Yeah.
Why is it still important to you that you've stuck with it and continued to invest in these relationships? Because it's clearly not about the money. So what is it about for you?
That is a really good question, and a question that I am constantly asking myself and leaning into prayer and asking God, like, what am I doing here? Why are we, because always trying to co-labor with God, why are we on this path of meeting and spending time with particularly the city and elected officials around homelessness? The best answer I can give right now is funding is at the core of what we're able to do at a fundamental level. However, it can be so, I've noticed that from some of my peers and other organizations, that they become so focused on that element of it that you can lose sight of the creative problem-solving mentality that is required when you're in a crisis or when something is broken and not working. And so my kind of prayer to God when it was obvious that we weren't going to get any public funding was, okay, I feel like I'm supposed to continue with these relationships. I need you to help us with the funding, because the city team has a budget and we need to be able to continue to operate. So you take care of that, and I will continue to follow these paths. And my fundraising strategy is not one I would package up and sell to other nonprofits. We have had so much fortune, and donors have just showed up. Private donors have showed up, and we have met our budget, which is lean. We operate very lean, but we just haven't had a lot of financial worries. And so that has freed up a lot of my time and my team's time to focus on programs, and for me to focus on these relationships, that just to see where they lead. So I think the why for me is I have lived experience. I know what works for me. I have the opportunity to work with hundreds, if not thousands, of other men and women that are coming out of incarceration, homelessness, and or addiction. And I've seen what works for them and what doesn't work. And I think that that's a really valuable combination of experience. And it would you've got a mayor who's laser focused on getting this city back on track, so to speak. And I don't think you can do that without addressing these souls that are living on the streets or coming into the streets out of incarceration or otherwise. And so I just feel like I'm supposed to continue to share what I see and my experience, and hope that it can guide the conversation. It's a complex problem, and there's no one solution. And I think that the thing that's been missing is collaboration and working together across the spectrum of solutions that are out there. And so one of my natural giftings is bringing people together from different opinions and different viewpoints, and being able to speak cross-culturally. There's not a lot of people that grew up in Silicon Valley, went to business school, wound up a heroin addict on the street, went through the criminal justice system, and can speak cross-culturally, and now is meeting with elected officials. And so that brings a lot of different, like, I can speak a lot of different languages in the space. And so I'm happy to continue to offer that skill set if it brings people together.
Totally. That's so cool. Thank you for going there. Because again, of course, I think the city's a better place because you are making time for this. I just wanted you to actually like explicitly say it, because I can imagine for other people in your shoes or maybe similar situations, you know, they maybe have this gut feeling that this should be worth it, but when you can't like give the explicit reason why, sometimes it might not feel worth it. And so I love that you've just kind of walked in obedience and faith and trusted that God will provide the rest. And again, the city is better because you're at these tables. So thank you.
Oh, I think also just an observation about the conversation so far is that, Lance, you know, your impulse to be of service, I think, has been so used by God. And you can see that's obviously why there's this supernatural blessing on things that aren't logically connected. And like, so you going to God going like, hey, I got this part, you got to have that part. That's so beautiful. And it's such a trust move. And the other thing is, I think when I zoom out and think about the Portland area, of people that are watching or listening to this episode are probably tuning in because they're trying to figure out more about Portland, whether they're from here or hoping to come here, but it's something about gospel in the city and like, what's it all about? And one thing that we particularly notice a lot, more and more, it seems like, is that collaborative impulse also to go, I'm not just a part of City Team. The point of City Team is to, make an overall difference in the city, right? So I think for all of us, just stopping right now and going like, how am I zooming out and thinking about that whatever organization or group we're with or church or whatever is only one little puzzle piece, and God's got all this other moving parts going around. And so I think you've just played very well into what God wants to do here by being so willing to not have those firm boundaries on your organization and your role. So thanks on behalf of all of us. That just is so encouraging.
Yeah. Thank you. It was not a strategy that was intended. It's just sort of unfolded that way. That's for sure.
Very cool. Okay. One question that we had thought about earlier was, if a pastor or church planter in Portland called you tomorrow and said, I want to get to know my mayor, where do I start? What would you say?
I think you have right now in our current Mayor Keith Wilson, he is so laser focused on immediately solving the unsheltered homelessness crisis that his time and even, I'll say this, even sometimes to a fault, we're going to do this by December 1st. And if you're not on board to this plan, or you can't offer something to contribute to that end goal, he's probably not going to meet with you at this point. And so I think, the best way, I think you have to ask yourself, why do I want to meet with the mayor? A lot of people want to meet with elected officials or people in positions of power simply out of curiosity or genuine desire just to have a relationship. And I think that's great and important. Right now, he would say, we're in a crisis. The city is in crisis. We're losing jobs. We're losing people are moving out of the county. Our homeless numbers keep going up and up. Our economic future is uncertain, and I'm being generous right now. So let's focus on, we're in disaster relief mode. And so I think that's the mentality that you have to have, and then be solutions focused to come together. For example, we just yesterday, Elise, you were there, we had a meeting of some of Portland's pastors, lead pastors and teams. I think we were 30 or so people that got together with the mayor at City Hall, and we sat down and spent an hour talking exactly about that. How can the church in Portland support the mayor's efforts and his plan to end unsheltered homelessness? And it was this just incredible, beautiful, energized moment of like how the church can support through volunteerism, changing the narrative. I think the biggest resource from my perspective that the church has is endless compassion, right? Endless compassion for the lost. And right now, the broader Portland, there's a lot of fatigue. There's a lot of compassion fatigue, particularly around homelessness, because we have been dealing with this for a long time, and businesses are getting tired of it. Citizens are getting tired of it. The church, this is our jam. This is what we do, right? This is what we're called to do. And so it was a real beautiful moment to see that kind of just endless compassion show up at the table, and not just be there to, let's pray about this. And no, let's actually, what can our congregations do to jump on board in this plan and provide volunteers at the shelters that the mayor and his team are opening, or, play music to help the trauma that some of these people coming off the streets can have experienced, and just have them soothe. And so it was really fun to see that happen.
That's so cool. I think if I was listening close, I think you made me think about how sometimes we come with our agenda and it's like, I want to talk to the mayor or the principal or the, commissioner or whatever, because I have this thing I want done, or I think this should happen. But what I hear you saying is you got to find the intersection of what God wants to do in the city and what the city also recognizes as important. And there is an intersection. So you're just meeting the people who can actually use the help and that have the leverage. You're meeting them at that point, which is beautiful.
Yeah, and what's really interesting.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say right now that the agenda of God's agenda aligns with the city's agenda right now, and that is to care for the lost on our streets, and that's a really unique time. And although maybe the government entities have a different viewpoint on how to do that, the fact that God's people, the kingdom and the church, are sitting at the table saying, this is how we do it. This is how we can offer help, while the city is supplying the infrastructure, the buildings to put the shelter beds in. That's a really unique and exciting time.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in any, relationship, I always like to think, okay, you want to think more about what you want for them than what you want from them, right? We say that sometimes in like fundraising and things like that. It can become kind of trite, but I think it's actually a really valuable thing if you actually mean it. And so when you're going into a relationship, like something with the mayor, it's like, yes, we want to also help in this thing, but in this like big problem that you're trying to solve. But I actually want the mayor to succeed right now on his agenda, because his agenda is, to your point, Lance, like perfectly aligned with the church. And so it could be really easy to go into that meeting thinking like, well, okay, if he tweaks it and gets it exactly right, and if it aligns exactly like me, then maybe. But I think we have to be humble enough to say, all right, I'm going to go in, and my like goal, I really hope to be able to support him. And of course, there might be other times when the goal is so unaligned that we have to say no to that. I'm not saying completely throw our values out the window, but like if we go in with the mentality of like, I want him to succeed, and I think that can align, I think there's so much beauty there. But there's a risk to that. There's a risk of saying yes to a meeting and feeling like, well, I have nothing to offer this. Maybe there's a world where you meet with your elected official and they ask you to do something and you say the church can't. There's a risk there. But the risk when we are able to say yes, when we are able to like leave the meeting like yesterday and say, I think there's actual action, it's so worth it. It's so rewarding. But it's only if we go into it thinking like, okay, I'm going in with the intention to help, not to get anything in return.
Collaborative spirit. You're going in with a collaborative spirit and open-minded to meet each other and talk about solutions.
So good.
Yeah. So good. Man, we've talked through so many things. One question that I want to ask you is, in your dream scenario, what would Gospel City engagement in Portland look like 5 years from now? When you think about all of this stuff that God has done and where it's headed, what do you think the dream looks like in 5 years?
Well, I think the dream, first of all, it would be, being able to take a meeting with the mayor and not have homelessness be the topic to discuss. And so I think the first thing is homelessness would be a rarity rather than the norm, that we would have enough shelter beds, residential treatment programs, community-based organizations out there that when someone falls through the cracks in society, like I did in 2018, that they were there to catch you, but that's not the norm. And instead, the church and the city and the business community is working on more entrepreneurial, exciting endeavors like getting Major League Baseball to Portland and a high-speed rail system from Seattle to Portland, and all kinds of crazy cool things that are already in play, made in Old Town. You've got we're the sneaker capital of the world. And you've got, this sustainable manufacturing facility in Old Town that's bringing jobs and housing and opening up manufacturing to smaller brands that want to create shoes and do it right here in Portland. And so a lot of this stuff is happening already, but I think 5 years from now, and I'll even say 1 year from now, I think that I want homelessness to be a back burner discussion and economic development and collaborative partnerships where the church and the business community and governments are working together to just create a really cool, thriving community where people of all backgrounds, whether it be socioeconomic or cultural, are thriving in a community together and celebrating one another. And that's my utopian dream for the city of Portland. And I think it's a achievable reality.
Yeah, that to me, that spirit of we can make a difference is so exciting because, as I'm even listening, like I don't live in the urban core of Portland, and I live in a neighborhood with different problems. I mean, some of them overlap, but definitely problems. And it's funny how some of the problems that our community is facing are those, basic, like, the survival ones rather than that, advancement, as you kind of just cast that vision for, we'll get past these lower lying, like you got to have these in place to thrive. We'll get past these, and then we'll be talking about achievement, and we'll be talking about real innovation and some of those things. That's exciting. But it reminds me that you're coming at this with we believe God can actually use us to make progress mindset. And I think that's important to just not go, we're always just going to be in the same place. We're always just going to be doing the same thing. We're never going to actually, we're only a voice of compassion. We're not a voice of progress. And I think I'm really excited to hear you talk with real anticipation for change because of the efforts that you're making. That's cool to me.
I remember when I had a year in treatment here at City Team to really examine my life and dream and think, what do I want to make my life at 42, 43 years old, right? So I've already had a lot of life. So my runway for what I wanted my life to look like was a little shorter than, being 18 or 19 in college. And so that really, I had to think about things like, okay, well, I want to be able to pay my bills. I want to get married and have a family someday. And so my conversations with God during that period were, okay, I know that my plans tend to really not work out well. And I wound up in this environment with my best thinking. So I want to turn this over to you. Here are the things I don't want to worry about. I want to be able to pay my bills. I don't want money to be a problem. I want to have enough of it to be able to enjoy my life. I, want to get married. I want a wife. And I will submit to your will for my life if you can just kind of take care of these basic things for me. And I know, getting married and finding a wife isn't a basic thing, but I knew God wanted that for me. So it didn't seem like a stretch to ask, but you take care of these things and I will submit my life to you and follow the path that you lay out for me. And I'm not kidding you. I have not had to stress about paying a bill since the day I laid that prayer out to him. And, I'm not living in the world of complete financial freedom, but I have certainly not had to worry about that. And so God just keeps kind of showing me that his will and his plan for me, there's more joy in partnering with God, even when you don't know exactly what's next for me, in my experience, than when I lay out a plan and have a success and achieve it, then, it's just better with him. And he has a tendency to just sort of take care of things. So that's been my experience. And I'm just going to keep doing that because it's working.
Well, thank you so much, honestly, for just unpacking your story and sharing some practical wisdom with us about what God's up to in our places. Elise, I'd love for you to just take a minute and encourage Lance with anything that, as you reflect back on this conversation, what does this do to you? How does this impact you? And what do you have to say to Lance?
Your whole story, Lance, is such a story of God working in you before you knew. Because you mentioned it at the beginning when you were talking about like moving high schools, right? And it's like, yeah, God is so good at using brokenness and just pulling redemption out of it. And that's what he's done to you. I started this by saying Lance is great at making friends. He could lead a masterclass on making friends. And it's because of the trauma and the hard things that the Lord has redeemed some of those things about the way he's made you wired. And he's using it to transform lives literally every single day through City Team. And then he's using it to have you be an influence of the kingdom in our city. And I know that you don't always necessarily lead with, oh, I'm a Christian and that's, the most important agenda. And yet you walk in that so naturally in a way where it's so evident to anybody that you meet. And so I just think it's such a beautiful story of just God redeeming some of the darkest parts of your story and now using those things, not choosing a different thing or putting those to sleep, but using those things to position you as such a kingdom, warrior in the city. It's just really, really cool. And so, and again, I mentioned he's good at making, Lance is the kind of person, for those of you who haven't met him, you meet him once and it's like, he makes you feel like you're the only person in the room and that you've known him for 10 years and that you could invite him to your birthday party tomorrow. He's just really, really good at that for anybody. And he's not faking it, like this is just genuinely who he is. He hasn't met a stranger. And I just think that's such a cool thing. And some of this, again, is stuff that you were born with, you were wired with. The Lord designed you specifically for this. And that's great. But there's also some principles that I think anybody in the kingdom can kind of take away and have our goal and ask the Lord to give us a little bit of that skill, because isn't it the kingdom to make everybody feel so valued, to have those interactions where people walk away feeling like, wow, that person loves me and I don't understand it, but I believe it. So anyway, that was a few different directions, but Lance, you're awesome. Thank you for sharing so much of your story and helping us understand why you are the way you are today. And I just think, again, I still think we have so much to learn from you. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
I
have to, if we're coming to a close here, I've got to share one last thing that I forgot on the crazy camera story. After I thanked him and, he said, good job, I'm proud of you, I deleted him as a contact in Facebook because, it's the kind of people you don't want in your life anymore once you've changed directions. About not a year ago, 6 months ago, I was sharing my testimony in front of a group of Portland executives at the Multnomah Athletic Club, just sharing my story. And afterwards, a guy came up to me and he's like, man, that's an incredible conversion story. Have you ever thought about reaching out to Crazy Cameron and like sharing where you're at today? And I said, well, if God wants that connection to come bear fruit, he will have to make it happen, because I don't think I'm going to go digging up that relationship. Again, he was a pretty scary guy. And I'm not kidding. The next morning, I wake up, it was Saturday, and I logged on to my computer and there's a message from a Cameron Avery in my inbox. And it was like, Lance, is this the Lance from Bend, Oregon that I stole your Jeep? If so, I want to make amends. And
No way.
I thought, oh my gosh, is this true? And so after a brief scan of his Facebook page to kind of see where he was at in life, and there's pictures of him and his kids and, doing normal father stuff, I responded. I was like, yeah, it is, man. And so we reconnected. We had a hour-long conversation. His story, it's crazy how God basically took two broken people and in our own paths after we met, had this just incredible life story of rebuilding and helping. He now is about an hour away from Portland. He helps people transitioning out of prison and into life. And he's active in the AA 12-step community. He went to prison after we parted ways and got sober and met the Lord in prison. And then when he got out, he now ministers to other people, is active in the church. And so pretty crazy that we're both, back on track.
What an end to this. Okay. That's incredible. You guys could co-write a book just on that.
No kidding. And also, do you have like a prayer hotline that people can call or something? Because your prayers are really powerful. You just phone number they could call and you just help them and they have that same experience. That's amazing, man. Thank you for...
I'll do a shameless plug for City Team. You can go to cityteams.org website and sign up to volunteer, and I'll pray with you when you get here.
There you go. I love that. No, seriously, but that's the last thing I want to do is like, how do people get a hold of you if they want to talk or get involved and support what's going on?
Yeah, the easy, no-brainer, amazing way how I got connected was through Night Strike. Every Thursday night under the Burnside Bridge, we are there 47 weeks out of the year. serving the homeless. You can sign up on our website, cityteam.org/Portland. And that's just a great way to get down on a safe, structured environment and meet our friends that are on the streets, learn their stories, wash feet, give haircuts, give out clothes. It's just an incredible way to be proximate and break down some of those barriers. And I'm there every Thursday, so easy to find.
That's so cool. And my family's been there multiple times. Love the experience. It is so well done. You think about that and go, ooh, that might be uncomfortable, or maybe I'll be nervous, but man, you guys just kill it. It's so good.
There's so many different on-ramps too. It's like, if you aren't quite ready to do the vulnerable, like just coming up to somebody and asking their story, like you can be giving out clothes or serving the food, so there's really an on-ramp for everybody at Night Strike. Do it.
Yeah. It's introvert friendly.
Okay. That's true. Because I'm an introvert mostly. So I felt fine. It was great. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks again. And we appreciate you investing in everybody who's listening and all of us. And we look forward to watching the God work that's happening through you and City Team. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Gabe. Thanks, Elise.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Jesus in the Upper Left. We want to ask you a quick favor. Would you please subscribe so you don't miss a single episode, and share with those that are in your life that might benefit from the content. Hit the notifications button, rate and review, of course, and then head on over to upperleftshow.com, where you can find bonus content, opportunities to connect with those around the city that are doing similar work as you, resources to help you, and just a way to connect to the community. We hope to see you again next time.